I just finished 20 pages of Babel, and I need to come up with an idea for a 20-minute learning exercise. And I can't think of anything to do. Class is tomorrow, and I'm brain dead. So, as with all good things, I remember something Bruce Krupnick said. He said, "We'd like to hear some of the babble about what you know about philosophy in terms of ethics. So tell us what's in your head." So I figured that'll take 2 minutes. And the other 18, I'm really good at bullshitting. So I will do that. I'm sorry to say the word shit. I will edit this when I get done. Take that out for people who are from the University of St. Thomas. So here I sit talking to myself in the privacy of my own home, feeling like an idiot, looking like an idiot, drinking Coke. And I will proceed to go through what I know or can reconstitute through miles and miles of experiences in years of being a father and losing brain cells because of it. So, let's hear. I am supposed to use Mosvik's teaching methods. Forget it. I'm not even going to think about that. This is going to be a stream of consciousness or stream of unconsciousness type approach. I can imagine all of you sitting out there laughing your arses off. Because I'm sitting here laughing my arse off too. So anyway, I will start to babble. In the beginning, that's pretty grandiose, I won't start that way. Let's see. What do I remember from philosophy, Bruce? I remember hearing about Socrates in about 400, 500 BC. He was a short, ugly little man who pissed people off by walking around and asking questions about their lives, things they didn't want to think about. And he's kind of the father of philosophy. He, I think, for ethics, thought that ethics was the science of conduct, which, after all, still holds true 2,500 years later. But he ticked people off to the extent that, as you know, probably they finally made him drink a cup of hemlock and did him in. And he had such honor and integrity that he owed a chicken to Cicero, and that was one of his last words was, "Give my chicken to Cicero," something kind of like tiny kangaroo balance sport. And he lived his ethics. Then came Plato, who was a student of Socrates. And Plato wrote the Republic, the Principles of Government. If you like reading your apartment lease, I suggest you read Plato. I read it and don't remember any of it because I didn't understand it. I once heard something too, to understand ethics, you need to have objectivity, experience, and intellectual capacity. So I wasn't very good at ethics. I have objectivity insofar as what I can accomplish, but I don't have much for intellectual insight. God knows I'm experienced. Or I listened a lot to Jimi Hendrix. Plato believed in moderation. Moderation was his ethics. And Bertrand Russell said, that's a great ethics, but it's mostly a great ethics if you're middle-aged. And I believe that. And then came Aristotle. Plato was a student of Socrates. And they don't know today, because Socrates didn't write much, but they think that the first half of Plato's writings were really words from Socrates. The last half of Plato's writings were Platonic or Plato's. And Plato had an academy that lasted until 1500 AD and eventually was destroyed with the Romans. And Aristotle was one of his students. Aristotle is one of the best things to happen to Catholics. God, there I go again. I'm sorry again, St. Thomas. You're a good university. Aristotle believed that good was doing things with good acts. And then Kant came and added, in accordance with God, that we have the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost. And Luther added faith. So Kant believed that as much as Aristotle, that good was to have good means, good acts. And I think Luther came and added, well, you also have to have faith if you're going to be doing that. So in effect, you need good means and good ends. So that's something that philosophers do a lot with themselves too. It's really boring to sit around and talk about something of which you know nothing and really can never prove nothing. So, and you like to enter into all of this logic because then it makes you feel like you're really bright, you know. So they overstate each other's cases. And I don't think Luther ever really believed that Aristotle said that the good acts will accomplish everything. But I think he closed it out nicely by adding that you really have to have faith. And then there's Epicurus, one of my favorite. Epicurus was given credit for hedonism, the total search of pleasure. And if I was ever a philosopher and lived in philosophy at all, it was probably then in the latter 1960s and early 1970s, and I can say I was a hedonist. But there again, in overstating a philosopher's case, it's not fair because Epicurus did not believe that the total search of pleasure or doing what was pleasurable was necessarily good. I think, again, from what I remember, he really advocated more of just avoid pain. If something's nipping at your butt, do something to get away from it. So it's not important what you're going to as much as what you're getting away from. And Aquinas, we didn't talk about Aquinas. Aquinas was very famous, and Aquinas was very fat. And he's probably the father of being compulsive. I heard once that he lived 3 miles from the ocean, and not until he was 18 did he ever see the ocean because it just wasn't in his routine. He also was very good for the Catholics. He was a devout student of Aristotle and pushed too that good is from good acts. But then there was Spinoza, who invented the piano. That's not true. He didn't invent the piano. I'm babbling to myself and feeling self-conscious. Spinoza was one of the first people to live his philosophy too, and he was eventually excommunicated from the church. He got away from reasoning and even started to talk that it depends too on what you feel like doing. That it isn't an extreme. It isn't all good or all bad. It's what your reasoning is, but it's dampened by how you feel, how the heck you feel. So, and that brings a good point about philosophy. There's different fields of philosophy, of which we know ethics. Of course, ethics is the search for what's right or wrong or good or bad. And then there's logic, what's valid or invalid. Aesthetics, what's pretty and what's ugly, or what's pretty ugly. And epistemology is the study of what do you know. So when you say to somebody, hey, what do you know? You're being epistemology, weak Joe. Metaphysics, the study of the nature of things. Is there a God? Is there not a God? We won't know that till we graduate from the ANDVD program. And then there's ontology, which is the study of being, not to be confused with oncology, which is the study of cancer. There's eschatology, which is the study of life and death, not to be confused with scatology, which is talking dirty. And then there's metaethics, and metaethics is studying the theory of ethics. So you can talk all day long about what's good or bad as long as you really don't have to live it. Jesus never really talked about the theory of ethics. God knows. Hobbes, Thomas Hobbes, nice guy. Hobbes was the first probably real depressed. Eventually came Kierkegaard, but Hobbes was really depressed too. Hobbes believed that life was continually trying to satisfy what our desires that never could be fulfilled. And he's one of the first people to start talking about norms and folkways and mores and laws. Eventually Locke, Descartes, Voltaire, and others started social contract. But Hobbes started a lot of that, but he lived in the time of the Puritans, so you can. That's another. That the first maxim is philosophers overstate each other's cases, so they can bitch each other out. The second is a lot depends on when the heck the philosopher lived, and Hobbes lived when there were the Puritan struggles. So you can see why, when he generalized that man's existence is to try to fulfill desires that can never be fulfilled. Well, if you lived in those times too, you'd probably say the same thing, and you'd be right. It's a really good quote. David Hume. Hume was also one of my favorites. And he said, you can't reason to good or bad. Forget it, he said. And he had the quote that reason is slave to the passions. I love that. I think it's reasonable. Somebody once said that because of David Hume, we doubted our ability to know anything at all. And I read once too that John Lennon was a follower of David Hume. And I really believed that after I heard Strawberry Fields Forever, because there's a line in there about, oh yes, it is. I think it is. It might be because it'll all work out. Oh yes, I think it's not too bad. Let me take you down. So, weak joke. Remember Frederick Marx from our Human Skills? Frederick Marx said, you can reason all of this stuff and you can do all of these things in management, but what good is it if you can't look back on it and appreciate it? Frederick Marx is where I gave my first stand-up speech and got really righteous on my soapbox and then shut up. And 11 months later, here I am again. I'm not going to show this tape anyway, so I'll go without the 5%. John Stuart Mill. Talk about compulsive. John Stuart Mill was an experiment. The human experiment, pretty much. Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill's dad, at the age of 3, started drilling all this classical philosophical thought into John Stuart Mill, and obviously a genius, or at least very knowledgeable. And he was the father of utilitarianism, as we heard about in class, to do the greatest good for the greatest good for the masses. And he probably went nuts when he was 19. But there again, to get back to ethics, utilitarianism, John Stuart Mill was, like Locke and Rousseau and Hobbes, Voltaire and Descartes, was an ethics person who helped to get started with man's political thought, to think about, well, it's rambling, and warm with this. Nietzsche. Nietzsche's exciting. Nietzsche went nuts too. He was will to power, the Superman. And I talked about how philosophers overstate each other's cases so that they can chew each other out, discredit each other, because they're all extremely insecure anyway. Self-insight. They were unfair to Nietzsche because I don't think Nietzsche, I remember reading, Nietzsche never really believed that might is right in terms of muscle power. More so, it was willpower in the might of truth. But the Nazis grabbed it. You can imagine what the Nazis did. The Nazis justified the Aryan race through Nietzsche. He had a slave mortality, it was called. But I liked him because he was one of the first to say, morality, what do you want morality to be? It's up to you. Well, don't ask me. Morality is whatever you think about, you decide for your life. So Nietzsche has a lot of guts. The long reason that I got leaked. I'll be right back. But Nietzsche did go nuts in 40. Where was I? Nietzsche. Nietzsche said about Aristotle that Aristotle is the patron saint of Babel. I remember that when it gets me. Anyway, Nietzsche got a bad rap. Patron saint of moral babble. Moral twaddle, that's what it was. Patron saint of moral twaddle. See, philosophy is worth it. I just wish I had the brain for it. But somebody said about Kant once that he's like Jehovah because he speaks through the clouds, but without the benefit of the illumination of lightning. I thought that was fun. Kant had all of these arguments for God. He had an argument that he said, this has nothing to do with ethics, and I'm sorry, John and Doug, but I got to get this out. And I'm not going to play this back to the class anyway, because this is kind of good time after a while. Never even playing with myself for 5% of my grade. But said there must be a God, because just like a clock, you can't have a clock without a maker. You can't have an earth without a maker. I mean, quid pro quo, there it is. And then he got his name in the books and down through the ages there. I mean, just for saying that. Maybe I could have been a philosopher. And then there was the concept of the perfect being. If we can think of something perfect, if we can conceive what is perfect, then it must exist. And I never really quite caught that. Kierkegaard would call that the leap of faith, but I never really quite caught the logic, because I can conceive of it that it must be. And I can conceive of this really beautiful blonde. And that doesn't necessarily mean she exists, okay? It's not a sexist comment. It's a completely logical statement to help convey philosophy to you guys. Oh, Pascal had the best argument for God. He said, if you believe in God, and there really is a God, hey, you're a lot much better off for it. But if you don't believe in God, and there is a God, oh, you're screwed. That kind of logic I can relate to. That, and he was going to name his first son Blaise, which I was going to do. And I was going to name my first two daughters Jacqueline and Catherine Jean Marie. On what was it? Hegel. Hegel was the dialectic. The good, or the thesis, and the bad, or the antithesis, come together to make the synthesis. It all sounds much more credible when you add big words to it, but basically what he's saying is you get some good and you get some bad, and they kind of merge together and you get some bad. Kissinger studied Hegel and did his doctoral thesis on it. And Hegel's ethics would be that, what would it be? The ends justify the means. It's the end result of what you do. And obviously Kissinger studied Hegel. I mean, look at Vietnam. And then probably my favorite would be Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard's life, like Hobbes, was miserable, but Kierkegaard had a lot of moral optimism. Kierkegaard was a spindly little man in Denmark, was sick a lot, and he thought a lot about what the world was about and finally concluded that it was pretty damned absurd. And he said, I don't like it being absurd, so I'm not going to interpret it as absurd anymore. He says, I'm going to believe that there's a God. He called that the leap of faith. He was the father of existentialism, essence before life. Your life is what you make it to be. If your life is miserable, it's because you wanted it that way. He was classic. So what would be? He believed there were no guidelines for human behavior. There's no guidelines for human action. The guidelines for your life are what you make them for your life, kind of an extension of Nietzsche, that your morality is what you make your morality to be. I think of all the people I've talked about, I think David Hume's probably still my favorite, because he says that you can reason forever, but still you're going to do what is driven by your passions. You can read John and Doug's 10-point checklist till you get down to the point that you've rationally identified all of the options. And then you're going to do what you feel is best. So what the 10-point checklist in effect accomplishes for you is some reasoning that lets you justify what you really feel like doing. So your reasoning is turned into rationalizing, but the advantage is, hey, you feel good about it. Bruce, I'm dying here. And they just realize I just talked myself out of the program, didn't I? Well, John and Doug, it's been a long day and I've written lots of pages. You're great guys. And I believe in most of what you say, and you're really good teachers.